In addition to the people I met and the unlimited amount of food I could eat when I was in town, the thing I liked best about the AT was the uncertainty of it all. You just never knew how a day was going to turn out, what good surprises were in store for you, and mostly they were good. On March 6th, I was in the Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. The trail was badly eroded and the snow was melting some and the water was running down this what amounted to a ditch, and I was hiking in the ditch. That afternoon it had begun to snow again, and when I spotted a handwritten note on a post about 1.7 miles south of Newfound Gap and US 441. Griswold, Tadpole, and the Hiking Vikings, who were ahead of me, had changed their minds about hiking on to a place called Icewater Spring Shelter, how appropriately was it named, where we had planned to meet that night. They decided to get a shuttle to Gatlinburg, get warm, get dry, get some good food, and avoid a 0-degree night on the trail. Did I want to join them? Does a bear live in the woods? Yes. I called them and left a message saying I would be at Newfound Gap by 3 p.m. I thought they were a mile, maybe 2 miles ahead of me, and I was afraid I would miss them, and I did. When I arrived at Newfound Gap, they were not there. The wind was howling at this point, blowing snow this way and that, and you could feel the temperature dropping. So what to do? Should I wait for Stretch? He was an Israeli who was the sixth person in our party. He was behind me. He might not even be coming. Perhaps he had stopped at the shelter, one shelter back, and indeed that's what he had done. Should I hike another 3 miles to the shelter, or should I hitch a ride into Gatlinburg? Let's see. Cold shelter, Gatlinburg, hot food, warm bed, Gatlinburg won. So I started hiking down US 441, planning on hitching a ride, but it didn't take long to realize that that wasn't going to happen. Not a single vehicle approached from either direction. Because of the blizzard, the highway had been closed. I was on my own. Well, in for a dime, in for a dollar, I'd walk to Gatlinburg. And I didn't know exactly how far it was, but it couldn't be that far, could it? It was a trail town. And what difference does it make? One way or another, that's where I was going. I had been walking through the storm for almost an hour when the law arrived in the person of Officer Heath Sohan, a U.S. Park Service officer. He slowed his cruiser, stopped beside me, rolled down the window. That warm air rushed out. And he said to me, "Where are the other four?" Well, I didn't know where the other four were, and I told him that. But one minute I was walking down the highway in blizzard-like conditions, and the next I was sitting in the officer's car getting warm. Turns out the four of them were back at Newfound Gap, where I'd been an hour ago. They had taken refuge in a heated restroom, heated to keep the pipes from freezing. Sohan was looking for them, not because they had called for help, but because they had called for a shuttle. And the shuttle folks had called the U.S. Park Service to find out if the highway had been closed and told them about the four hikers. Sohan drove back to the parking lot at the top, honked his horn, and here they came, boiling out of that restroom. The five of us shared a suite in a hotel in Gatlinburg that night, which cost us $12 each. And then we went out to eat together. I had ribs and ice cream. And exactly how many miles was it to Gatlinburg? How far would I have had to walk through the storm? 17, the officer told me. With that introduction, I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions and tell you my two favorite stories and then take your questions. Did you hike alone? Yes, except for the 2 weeks or so I hiked with Jay in California, I did hike alone almost all the time. Most through hikers hike alone, even those with a partner, because they can go faster. When you see 3 or 4 hikers together, they're almost always day hikers or section hikers, because section hikers want to visit with each other. They want to talk, and they stop for each other. Through hikers don't have time to stop every time somebody wants to put on clothes to get warm, take off clothes because they're too warm, or get a drink of water or something to eat, or take a picture, or check out the view, or tie their shoe, or pee. Just how serious are hikers about pack weight. Pretty serious. After they've been on a trail for a while, some hikers send their stove and cooking pot home and begin eating cold meals. Some of them send their tents home. In one shelter where we stayed, the Vikings and I found several hundred pennies that had been abandoned by hikers. Pack weight. We left them there because we didn't want to carry them out either. Question. I know the trail runs through the Appalachian Mountains, but just how much climbing do you have to do? No matter where you are on the trail, it won't be long before you're hiking up a mountain, and then down the other side, and then up another mountain, and down, and up, and down, up, down. It's not always up, down, of course. Sometimes it seems like up, 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 down. According to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, the total elevation gain is the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest 16 times. In the wilderness in Maine, the trail went up and over so many mountains, they apparently ran out of names. One was called Third Mountain. Another was called Mount 3.5. Another Fourth Mountain. So what do hikers talk about when they get together in shelters at night? It's really easier to say what they don't talk about. Politics, religions, the stock market, the big news story of the day. They don't know what the big news story of the day is and don't care much. The other thing they don't talk about might surprise you. They don't talk about their injuries or their aches and pains. Mostly what hikers talk about is the day and the next day. And sometimes they tell stories. Nate, one of the Vikings, told me this story about his dad, Richard, who was a farmer. On winter mornings, he said his father would get together with other farmers in a restaurant downtown and eat, have breakfast together and visit. And one of these mornings, Nate's dad told the other men that he had shot a porcupine, prompting a friend to tell him, "Well, Richard, porcupines are protected." And Richard replied, "This one wasn't." Did you carry a weapon, a pistol? No, and I don't know anyone who did. The AT is, relatively speaking, safe. Safer than walking down a city street. A hiker who was armed would be ostracized. Other hikers would be afraid of him or her and avoid him. How is your health doing? Good. I hiked the entire trail with a hernia that I didn't know I had when I started. I had that surgically repaired on August 10th. I had to take it easy for a few more weeks, but I'm okay. The frostbite sores on one of my hands and ears healed up months ago, and the feeling has returned to my fingers. Little by little, the feeling is beginning to return to my toes. Trail lore has it that by Christmas, they'll be okay too. I lost 3 toenails, and I think I'll lose 3 or 4 more, but that's not a biggie. I lost 25 pounds by the end of the hike. I was worn down a little, tired, but 6 weeks of good food and rest has cured that. How much did your pack weigh? Well, it varied a lot, from less than 20 pounds to almost 40, depending on the time of the year. Winter gear weighs a lot more, and how much food and water I was carrying. If I knew I could resupply in 2 days, I carried 2 days of food, but I also carried up to 6 days of food, which is approximately 2 pounds a day. How do you stay clean on the trail? Well, you don't. On several occasions, I went a week or more without a shower. Hikers brush their teeth regularly, but I never saw anyone wash their hands. Drinking water was so hard to come by, sometimes you had to walk a quarter of a mile or more there and back to a creek or a spring, that I sometimes drank my dishwater. That way, I got the calories suspended in water, and I didn't waste the precious water. How many pairs of boots did you wear out? 2. What did you typically have for breakfast, for lunch? Well, at the beginning, I really didn't eat very much. But after I got in the swing of things, for breakfast, I had 2 Pop-Tarts, 2 Carnation Instant breakfasts, and 2 cups of hot chocolate with the most calories that I could find wherever I was when I bought it. For lunch, I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a hiker steak, Spam sandwich, and a handful of nuts and lemonade. For supper, mashed potatoes and a summer sausage, or a hiker steak and cheese if I had some, and lemonade, and dehydrated corn, which I liked a lot. Did you see a bear or a moose? No. And I would not have seen one unless they laid down in the trail in front of me and wiggled. As I was far more concerned and worried about rattlesnakes, and I kept my eyes glued to the trail looking for them. I saw 19 snakes, but no rattlers. I didn't even see a bear on Bear Mountain. I didn't see a bear at the Trailside Museum in New York, where the trail went right by a cage with 2 bears in it. What animals did you see beside the snakes? I saw 1 porcupine, 1 groundhog. I saw or heard numerous turkeys, and I saw 3 or 4 dozen deer. How about mice in the shelters? Well, except for one cold night in February, they weren't much of a problem. That night, we all jumped in our sleeping bags as soon as we got to the shelter. We'd hiked over 16 miles in awful weather. Most of us didn't hang our food bags that night, including me. Once everything got quiet, the mice were all over us, literally, munching down. I used my bag like a pillow, thinking, hoping that would keep the mice away. I was wrong. One ran across my head. Did you ever consider quitting? No. I guess that's one of the things I did right. I made up my mind about that long before I left home, and so quitting was never an option or an issue. Did you have fun? Well, define fun. I met a lot of terrific people. I made some good memories. I'm glad I went. But the AT is not, as humorous Bill Bryson might have you believe, a walk in the woods. That's what Bryson calls his best-selling book, which has now been made into a movie by the same name. Hiking the AT is hard work, at least it was for me. Well, define hard work. When the days started getting longer, I usually hiked from 6:30 in the morning until 5 or 6 at night, and sometimes 7 or 8. Most days I was tired and ready to hang it up by 2 or 3 in the afternoon, but you can't get to Maine by knocking off ship's work in the middle of the afternoon. Hungry and tired, at least in the evening, are through hikers' everyday companions. When my friends and I finally got to Maine, we began running into more and more Sobos, southbound hikers, because the winter weather is so bad on Mount Katahdin. Sobos have to start a lot later in the year than we do. When we met them, most of them had hiked less than 200 miles. We had hiked more than 2,000. I was hiking briefly one day with Sharon McCrae, one of the Vikings, when a Sobo stopped to talk to us and said, "I am so tired." Sharon said something pleasant in response, and we moved on. But when we were out of earshot, she said to me, "I wanted to tell him, not as tired as you're going to be." Do you mind if I take a bite out of your arm? Oh. What did you worry about the most? I was most concerned about an injury that might end my hike. As careful as I tried to be, I usually fell down once or twice a day. One day I fell down 6 times. Altogether, I fell down more than 200 times. I was never seriously injured. I did get bruised a lot. And one time when I fell down in a cow pasture, I bruised my pride. It happened when I was looking around, not watching where I was going. I was looking for a post in the middle of the pasture with a white blaze on it, or a tree by itself with a white blaze. Where are the white blazes? Anyway, I wasn't looking down, and I stepped in the middle of an enormous, wet cow patty and fell. Did you get any on you? Well, is fresh cow poop slick? Why did you fall so much? Old age? Well, that's part of it, but everybody fell some, including all those young people. They just didn't fall as much. Did many women hike alone? Yes, most of the ones that I met did. Scott, Griswold, Red Feather, Temper, Storm, Cashmere, Smiles, Eddie, all hiked alone. Mother Nature hiked with her son, and Sharon of the Hiking Vikings hiked with Nate, her fiance, and now her husband. But no one's really alone, men or women, because hikers look out for each other. How much trash did you see on the AT? Well, almost none, except at the shelters. It's really amazing. Sometimes you would hike for miles without seeing the smallest piece of trash. Did you pick it up? Well, sometimes, not always. How much did it cost to hike the AT? Well, how much did it cost to buy a car? You know, it depends. I think a good rule of thumb for most people is $2 a mile, not counting equipment. You hiked a lot with the Hiking Vikings. Were you together at the end? Well, no. The Vikings climbed Mount Katahdin on July 12th. I finished 2 days later on the 14th with Mother Nature in between. The Vikings got ahead of me on June 27th when one of my knees began coming unglued. I'd only hiked 12.7 miles that day, and they hiked further. The next morning, I got off the trail in the vicinity of Rangeley, Maine, after hiking only 4.5 miles, and I stayed in a hostel there that day, and the next day I took a zero, which is hiker talk for a day off. That put the Vikings 2 full days ahead of me, and I never saw them again. But let me tell you what happened the day before I left the trail. The Vikings went into Andover, Maine that morning, June 27th, to resupply and eat a big breakfast. Well, I wanted to go with them, but I just really couldn't afford it. That would be 2.5 or 3 hours away from the trail. And they were so much faster than I was, even when I wasn't hurt, and I was hurt now. So I stayed on the trail and kept hiking, and they went into Andover. And when they got back, it took them a while, but just before I reached the shelter that night where I intended to stay, they caught me. Nate enjoyed telling me all about that breakfast I had missed. 3 pieces of French toast, 3 eggs, hash browns, link sausage, homemade toast, coffee, and one more thing I can't remember. I asked them if they had brought me anything, and they said, yes, they did. They brought me a candy bar, but they ate it. Stiles, Huck, Crumbs, and Bruin were at the shelter when we arrived, and I told them the Vikings had been to Andover and didn't even bring me a piece of bubble gum. And at that moment, Nate pulled out a hiker breakfast, identical to the one he had eaten that morning, and gave it to me. I was floored. What a sweet surprise. Did I reheat it? Nah. I gobbled it down, every crumb. It was delicious. They left while I was eating, and I never caught up. On average, how long does it take to complete a through hike of the AT? From 5 to 7 months, according to the Conservancy. The average is slightly under 6 months. I like to say I hiked it in 4 months and some few odd days, but it was actually 429. 4 months, 29 days. Would you like to hit through hike the AT again? Well, no. Part of me would like to have another shot of it. I'd like to profit from some of the things I learned, but no, there are too many other things I want to do. Well, what did you learn that you think is so important? Attitude is so important. Over the past several years, since I retired in 2008, I had section hiked almost 500 miles of the AT, but all of it was in the south of Penmar, Pennsylvania, which is right on the border. I thought I knew what the trail was like. I was wrong. I knew what the trail was like in the south, not in the north, which is considerably more difficult. Pennsylvania, also known to hikers as Rocksylvania, bothered me, but not as much as it would have if I hadn't known about the rocks up there. I don't mean I liked them, I didn't. But they didn't throw me completely off stride. New Hampshire did. The mud, and there's lots of it, reminded me of Vermont. The steep climbs, North Carolina. The rock hops, Pennsylvania. And the rock climbs and scrambles, New York. The difference was New Hampshire had it all, and so very little good trail to go with it. Did you ever see the movie Private Benjamin, where Goldie Hawn is crawling through the mud and under the barbed wire, and she says, "This is not the army I joined. I joined the army of condos and swimming pools." Well, for a while I felt the same way. I joined the Let's Go for a Hike army. I didn't join the Let's Go for a Rock Climb army. New Hampshire is the most difficult, by far, of the 14 states on the trail. And it's not just the terrain. The trail is not well maintained there, and it's not well marked. In one manner of speaking, there is no AT in New Hampshire. In the other 13 states, other trails piggyback on the AT. In New Hampshire, the reverse is true. The AT is doing the piggyback, and if you're not careful, you can get lost. One day we started out on a trail called Crawford Path, then switched to the Trinity Heights Connector, the Gulfside Trail, the Osgood Trail, the Osgood Cutoff, the Great Gulf Trail, the Madison Gulf Trail, and finally Old Jackson Road, where we tent camped in a nearby woods. I'd heard that old adage, when you get to New Hampshire, you've done 20% of the work and 80% of the miles. Still, no, that's not the way that goes. It's just the opposite. It's 80% of the miles and 20% of the work. Still, I was not prepared mentally for the near vertical walls I encountered. Well, just the endless rocks and roots and mud deep enough to drown a giraffe. Sometimes the trail went almost straight up, causing me to ask myself, they have got to be kidding. But they weren't kidding. One day the trail was so bad, the whole thing got to be funny, thanks to the Vikings, who were an hour or two ahead of me. I was hiking by myself when the trail made a right turn into a creek. Well, that's even for New Hampshire. That's bad. I'd never seen anything like it. Now, I'd seen plenty of water in the trail where a creek ran into it. I'd never seen anybody turn the trail into the creek. But I turned right and began hiking down it for 100 to 200 feet down a waterfall. And finally I thought, they cannot possibly be serious. I took my pack off and hiked back to the top and spent 15 minutes looking for the trail. It couldn't be going. It did go in the creek. There was no other way. So I went back down, picked up my pack and started down this creek. And I had gone another, 100, 200 yards when I came on a note on a rock in which Nate had written, "Are you mad yet, Lucky?" I finally settled down and actually enjoyed hiking in Maine, which by reputation is the second hardest state. Parts of it look a lot like New Hampshire, but the trail there is better maintained and blazed. If I had known more about New Hampshire, I think I would have settled down quicker, and who knows, I might even have enjoyed it. If I had a do-over, I would buy microspikes and have them with me when I left Springer Mountain. I wasn't able to buy any until I got to Gatlinburg after the worst of the ice was over, but I did have fun while it lasted. On the first day I had the spikes, I was walking uphill on ice when I encountered 4 men trying to come downhill, trying to figure out how they were going to come downhill. And one of them said to no one in particular, "I'd give $500 for a pair of those," referring to my microspikes. Now, he wasn't talking to me and didn't make me that offer, but if he had, I would have turned him down. I would carry camp shoes, Crocs probably, which I could have used when I had to ford streams and rivers. I'd come up with meal menus at home instead of waiting to do it on the trail after I'd lost more than 20 pounds. I'd be more careful with my gear. I lost 12 or 14 items, clothing, water filters, food, so many things that had to be downright inconvenient as well as embarrassing. There's a saying among lightweight backpackers which my carelessness forced me to adopt. And the saying is, if you need it and don't have it, you don't need it. I want to close with my favorite story from the hike. When I returned to the trail on March 21 after a surgeon had diagnosed the hernia, the Vikings were long gone. They were 6 days ahead of me, somewhere around 100 miles. But Nate got shin splints and they had to slow down. And I guess while I didn't speed up, I did begin hiking more miles. I was still several days behind when I got a text from Sharon asking for a favor. They had lost a ring. They left it in a shelter that I was coming to. They left it on a nail on the wall of the shelter. She asked me to check to see if it was still there and get it if it was. I said I would, and much to my surprise, it was. Meantime, Nate had asked Sharon to marry him, and she said yes, and they sent me this video of that moment. I text Sharon and asked if the ring I'd found was a ring or the ring. She replied it was a ring, but she said it has a story. I was still 2 days behind when the trail entered the Shenandoah National Park in Northern Virginia. Compared to the rest of the AT, the Shenandoah is as flat as a kitchen table. So I laid my ears back and went all out to catch them. In 4 days, I hiked 106 miles. After dark on a cold, rainy night in late April, almost 6 weeks after I'd gone home, I did catch them. I returned the ring, and Nate told me the ring story. He said he believed in asking a woman's father for his blessing and before asking for his daughter's hand in marriage. And so he couldn't do that, though, because Sharon's father is dead. So Nate said he talked to Sharon's father in his thoughts and asked for his blessing. That's when he found the ring, almost completely covered in dirt, barely visible. It was to him her father's answer, yes. The Vikings were married on July 22nd, 10 days after they finished their hike. And that's the end of my presentation.